Good morning. I am Debbie Rubenstein, and my pronouns are she and her. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist community of Charlotte. Challenged by our liberating faith, we discover deeper spiritual meaning, nurture loving community, cultivate courageous connections, and partner in the work of justice. Welcome to each and every one of you, whether you're here in person or joining live stream, whether today is your first or your 1000th Sunday in our midst. We are stronger because you are with us. We are one people of many beliefs, origins, identities, and genders. We are all growing, all learning, all loved. It is good to be together. We welcome to the pulpit today Liam M. Hooper. Liam has a Master's of Divinity degree, is a gender theorist, a theological activist, writer, podcaster, consultant, educator, and participant learner interested in co-facilitating learning communities. To these endeavors, he brings decades of lived experiences, training, and a heart for relational, connective practice, curiosity, honesty, and a willingness to stay in the conversation. Liam lives here in the South with his wife, Diana. Both are adjusting to their son being away at college and at home in the summers, which keeps them on their toes. Liam, thank you for sharing yourself with us this morning. We invite you now to greet one another. If you're viewing the service online, please go to our public Facebook page and greet one another online. So as this is a service inspired by the days of awe, I decided to share some of the true ritual from the services that were held last week. Later, we'll hear one of the key prayers of the time, the Avinu Malkeinu, but now we're lighting the chalice, and like UUs, when Jews gather to pray, we light candles, and we say a version of the Baruch Hu, the blessing. This is the one we said on Yom Kippur. Baruch Hu atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Yom HaKippur. Source of blessing, eternal our God, you fill the universe with majestic might, teaching us holiness through sacred obligations, giving us the mitzvah of bringing us light on Yom Kippur. This is a Rosh Hashanah blessing. This Rosh Hashanah, each of us enters with a different need. Some hearts are full of gratitude and joy. They are overflowing with the happiness of love and the joy of life. They are eager to confront the day, to make the world more fair. They have recovered from illness or have escaped misfortune, and we rejoice with them. Some hearts ache with sorrow. Disappointments weigh heavily upon them, and they have tasted despair. Families have been broken. Loved ones lie in bed in pain. Death has taken those whom they cherished. May our presence and sympathy bring them comfort. Some hearts are embittered. They have sought answers in vain. They have had their ideals mocked and betrayed. Life has lost its meaning and value. May the knowledge that we too are searching restore their hope that there is something to find. Some spirits hunger. They long for friendship. They crave understanding. They yearn for warmth. May we, in our common need, gain strength from one another, sharing our joys, lightening each other's burdens, and praying for the welfare of our community.
This is a blessing for the Shofar on Yom Kippur by Julie Silver. Do not wish me an easy fast. Let my fast be difficult. Let me remember the hungry people of the world who have no choice, no voice. Let me understand that starvation and emptiness exist even when there is plenty of food on the table. And if my fast causes me pain, let me sit with the pain. If my head throbs, let me handle it. If my stomach grumbles, let me welcome the sound as I welcome the shofar blast. Let my fast be the call. Let my life on earth be the response. As this is your Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. So it's always interesting to be in a new place, right? You don't know if you're going to offend anyone or have people start jumping up and down and amening along the way. So we'll just, we'll see what happens. I'm really, really glad to be with you and to be called here by my good friend Lisa. So in Judaism, this is the month of Tishrei, which means as a people, we have moved through the reflective month of Elul, making ourselves ready for the new year by remembering it is never guaranteed, that it is always, like all of life, a gift. We have greeted Rosh Hashanah, the new year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. With so many of our kindred, we have heard the unmistakable calls of the shofar, the crying sounds of the ram's horn, turned inward prepared for the new year, taken account of missteps and challenges toward becoming the people we wish to be, reflected on our trials and joys, and made our way to this day in the year of 5783. And along the way, the shofars have sounded. Now, 5 days after Yom Kippur, at sundown this evening, we begin the 7-day festival of Sukkot. Sukkot, the festival of booths or huts, is both a harvest festival and a time of wilderness remembrance, of making space in temporary shelters and considering the long, formative trek to Sinai, where the whole of the Jewish people gathered. That's right. Our ancestors, we the still living and those yet to come, together somehow and received the Torah, the complex, layered, and arcane, yet remarkably relevant set of stories and instructions that guide us in striving to live an ethical life. Or so the story goes, anyway. At least, in some ways, it's a powerful story. It kindles a collective remembering, if nothing else, that liberation from the tyrannies of mind, body, and labor is costly. That freedom to think and act, to be and become in community with others equally endowed with freedom is in fact not free. It carries weighty responsibilities, demands attention, continual vision casting, thoughtfulness, and care. Being liberated to exercise our innate freedom takes some getting used to. It requires contemplation, adjustments, and conciliations, more than a little contending with self and world, missteps, learning to think and move in new ways, growing and learning anew over and over again. Sometimes, as the wilderness story teaches us, it takes generations. The shofar reminds us of this. And so we build Sukkot, temporary shelters, and we remember. There is a teaching that we are instructed to hear the actual shofar itself, not an echo or a distant hum of the horn. The Midrash tells us this is so because when Adonai spoke to the people, the voice of the Eternal was so powerful, it penetrated and permeated every person, every living thing, and every element in the universe. There was no echo. No worded ideas bouncing off of rock and cliff and canyon, only permeation. And so it should be with the shofar, that it should penetrate us, seep stirringly into us and rouse us. To merely hear the shofar, to not be changed by it, moved to higher aspirations and actions is to miss the point and the opportunities. This year, particularly in my own wilderness wanderings, I am struck by a growing reality that in this country alone, literally and allegorically, there have been multiple resounding shofar blasts crying to get our attention, to awaken us to reflection, inspiration, and action. And although over these last, 400 odd years, from generation to generation, lador vador, many perceived the ram's horns wailing drones. Though many among us in the present have sensed the piercing alarms all around us, now as in the past, for far too many, the sounds have failed to penetrate, failed to stir and awaken. For many, the shofar calls have been merely weak and waning echoes. The trouble with echoes is that in all the bouncing off things too thick to penetrate, the sound becomes distorted, easy to misinterpret. I'm reminded of a midrash. You allow me to entertain you with a midrash. about a man from a small country village who traveled to a large city. It was the first time he'd ever been to a large city, and there he found lodging at an inn, ate dinner, and settled in for the evening. In the middle of the night, he was awakened by the rousing of drumming and horns blowing outside in the streets. Perplexed by discordant music at such a late hour, he inquired what was going on. The innkeeper, on his way outside, advised the traveler a fire had broken out. The drums and horn blasts were how these city folk handled a fire. Tired and drowsy, the man returned to bed. When he awoke the next morning, he was amazed to discover the fire had been extinguished and the other buildings had been spared. Back home, the traveler told the villagers of the city dwellers' marvelous method for responding to fires. And at once, the people set about acquiring drums and horns and noisemakers of all sorts. And some time later, when a fire sparked, the people filled the streets, beating their drums, blowing horns, and fighting fire with fanfare. In a deafening din of noise-making, the people waited for the fire to be extinguished, while all around them, many of their homes burned to the ground. During this disaster, a city dweller passing through the village heard the noise and ran into the street to help. When he saw the people gathered around banging drums and blowing horns while fire laid waste to their homes, he queried, "What are you doing? Why do you not put out the fire?" Proud and excited, the villagers explained their newly discovered technology. Shaking his head and waving his arms about, he admonished the people, What? Do you not know you can't put out a fire with noise making? The drum is an alarm, an announcement. It calls the people to action. And so it is with the shofar. The shofar has meaning only when it penetrates us, permeates our consciousness, and awakens us to thoughtful attention and meaningful values-based action for our own betterment and the good of our communities. Full awakening, the sages teach, comes only when we feel and perceive the wholeness of the shofar. Absorbing the fullness of every tone, we become conscious of our circumstances, able to think clearly, reflect, and discern helpful responses. Half measures and mere echoes do not rouse. They do not transform. It seems to me there's a good teaching in this parable of the traveler and the fire, especially in our current times as multiple drums and shofars are sounding from all corners while the world burns, literally and figuratively around us. In a somewhat comical way, the tale suggests there are consequences to being slow, if not resistant, to rousing. For our hapless traveler, the drums and horns were a non-penetrating echo. Stuporous and distracted by comfort seeking, he did not stick around until the noise-making stopped and the work began. And in so doing, he received a distorted message and surmised a set of false conclusions. More consequentially, he then carried the flawed message to his community where they who trusted him were misled and harm was done. Generally, we humans all make mistakes, missteps, and miscalculations. It's a natural part of being human. The lessons in our misperceptions and missteps are good teachers when we heed them. Still, some mistakes have grave consequences. This story, I think, describes characteristics and circumstances common today amid a multitude of figurative fires and our growing efforts toward greater collective liberation to freely exercise with responsibility and intention our personal and collective rights to the self-determinations, protections, and access to resources afforded all members in a truly just society. Between the lines of the story, there is the elevation of personal perspective to universal truth rather than a part of a larger whole, an unwillingness to shift vantage points for broader perspective, and a troubling affliction with magical thinking. Hence the idea that drum banging will put out a fire. This is not unlike the assumption that the protection of reproductive rights is a given, or that we are past the days of illegalizing identities based on gender, sex, sexuality, race, national origin, or religion. Or perhaps more worrisome, the belief that fascist theocracy will never happen here on our shores, despite evidence of its necessary underpinnings throughout our history. Among these traits is a characterological orientation toward egocentric superficiality and a disposition toward easier, softer solutions, a social lethargy and lack of awareness of human interdependence. And all of this complicated by a general disposition toward accepting opinions and conclusions at face value without query, investigation, or other input. And certainly a fundamental lack of understanding that when the village is on fire, it takes everyone working together to put it out, clean up the mess, and make repairs. It is true, not everyone can tote water hoses. They're rather heavy. Not everyone can haul debris or rebuild a structure. Some of us can blow the shofar and some cannot, but all can respond in some way. Some are called to be the crier in the streets, reminding us the alarm is not the resolution, but a call to attention, to collective response. Some are visionaries, inspiring others. Some are leaders, and some bring soup and sandwiches. Some are called to encourage the community. Some are able to engage in the relational work that shifts perspectives, one person at a time, making possible a day when we can all discern a present danger and do our unique part to address it. In all our diversity, we all have a portion in the work of an inclusive common good. No portion, no contribution is too small. When the village is burning, and equally when it's thriving, all of us are essential workers, thinkers, vision casters, water carriers, and soup makers, and surely members of a communal community. The shofar reminds us of this. The sukkah calls us to place our bodies in the shelter, to invite others to enter with us, and to remember the wandering trek towards Sinai, where all liberation seekers, then, now, and yet to come, gathered and received the teaching, once in the singular second person. You, each individual, shall love your neighbor as yourself and care for the strangers in your land. And then in the plural, second person, this is lost in the English. You need the Hebrew for this. Secondly, in the plural, second person, you all together shall inherit the good land, tend it, and regard all who live among you as your kindred, that you may all live and thrive as one people. The shofar reminds us of this. The sukkah and the 7 days we sit in it embody it. All around us, everywhere, shofars are sounding. May we be awakened, permeated with hopeful inspiration, and discern our own unique calling. The shofar is sounding, stirring us from the wilderness, rousing us to hear now, in this space, the call of the shofar in our own hearts. May it be so.
Tekiah Gedolah.
Leave the rest behind, it'll turn to dust. This is the sound of all of us. This is the sound of all of us. This is the sound of one voice. One people, one voice. A song for every one of us. This is the sound of one voice. This is the sound of one voice.
That was lovely. So welcome. We're happy you're here with us today in this room or joining us remotely. We're pleased to have guests with us in this room and participating through our live stream. Our members would like to greet those of you who are here following the service. So if you're visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Welcome. Members, take note of guests seated near you and invite them to join you for coffee and conversation when the service ends. If you're visiting us by way of live stream or viewing an archived version of this service, we'd welcome an opportunity to connect with you as well. I encourage you to reach out to our Director of Member Relations, Kelly Green. You can reach her at kelly@uuccharlotte.org. Now, should it enhance your experience of future services in our sanctuary, we offer large print order of services, which I should have gotten because this is brutal. Personal assistance devices, and have an elevator available as well. There's also a hearing loop in the alternate worship space in the Bernstein Room. Welcome to each of you, visitor and member alike. So, I'm Debbie Rubenstein, and my family and I have been members of the UUCC for 20 years. I, like nearly, but not all Jews, come from an immeasurable line of Jewish ancestors. And when I celebrate the High Holy Days each year, I connect myself to that line of thinkers, sufferers, and survivors, just as I link together with Jews around the world, be they new or old to the faith. Jews in Ethiopia, in the Ukraine, in Arabia, and elsewhere. We may be few, only about 0.2% of the world's population, but we are there. A community that takes pride in our hard-won existence. And at the heart of that existence is relationship. Relationship with one another, our relationships with one another, which are holy and fraught, and our relationship with God, which is just as intimate and just as fraught. During the days of awe, our rituals define and reinforce our community of God and one another. We build relationships through the rituals, confessing as a group, admitting our sins as a group, and asking one another to forgive us. Even as we ask forgiveness, we admit we will cause harm in the new year, and we acknowledge that others will harm us. And yet, we affirm that we will continue to be a community anchored in one another and in forgiveness into that future. It boils down to relationship. The theologian Martin Buber believed that a relationship with God was experienced and built through relationships with people. My Jewish worldview echoes that. The contemplation of the unknowable, the ineffable, is not an act of thought. It is an act, rather, of discovering and relating to fellow humans. Values and truths are defined, discovered, and experienced through how we treat one another. I sometimes wonder how our UU community, how our democracy might feel different with this worldview. After all, they both rely on only a promise to exist. A promise to remain in community despite differences in beliefs and practices. Both are, at heart, a commitment to the value of the relationship itself over any single ideology. What if we imitated Yom Kippur's collective litany of sins, confessions of betrayal, scorn, and more, and added to them our collective sins of homophobia, of racism, of closed-mindedness, of partisanship? Not the sins, not others' sins, but ours. What if we were less concerned with weighing how much individual actions or words contributed to our collective sins and more concerned with recognizing that we are all part of the problem, which frees us to all be part of the solution, to practice atonement, and to work towards a better tomorrow without having to prove our perfection today. To be human is to be deeply flawed, and being part of a community that admits and expects my flaws while continuing to hold me with belonging is one of the holiest things that I can imagine. So everyone is invited to join us in the assembling of 200 or more sandwiches for our homeless neighbors to be delivered to roof above. We'll meet after the service at 11:45 in Freeman Hall, directly across the vestibule there. You're also invited to attend a session in the Bernstein Room, which is downstairs, following this service, updating us on Reentry Housing Alliance and the ways you can be involved. The Bernstein Room is located directly below this sanctuary. Reentry Housing Alliance offers housing and assistance to individuals coming out of prison. Please see our website and our electronic newsletter, Currents, for information about the ways you can engage in the life of our community. Please join me in a time of contemplation or prayer. I invite you to breathe deeply. Be present to the spirit of life which is in us and through us and around us, to those human connections that give us strength when we struggle and celebrate when we are joyful. The gathered community hears and holds both difficulty and ease as we honor the experiences that make each of us who we are. We hold Mary Bruce with love as she recovers from a medical procedure. And we hold Annie Flint with love and compassion as she is currently hospitalized with a broken pelvis and shoulder. And now, please join me in a moment of silence as we honor all the concerns shared today and those that remain in our hearts. Amen, and blessed be. So, my kids are nearly gone, one's in college, one's leaving next year. And when they reach that stage, you hope to have prepared them to do the right thing because they can no longer be compelled to do what you believe is right. Our congregation is facing the same moment of growth, of flight, We have been ably led for 20 years, and now we are embarking on a new stage. We are determining our future trajectory, I should have used a simpler word, and values on our own, with the expertise and mentorship of Reverend Lisa, of course. So what will you contribute? What do you choose to support? And how do you want to support this community now that it is entirely up to us? We will now accept the offering. So, because Jay's not here to do it, I'm going to share a poem. This is The Sun Never Says by Hafez. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole sky. Please be seated for the closing words.